From a former champion's shattered confidence to odds that drastically underestimate him, here's how Leon Edwards is going to destroy Kamaru Usman at UFC 286. In August of 2022, at UFC 278, the world of MMA was flipped on its head when, in one of the greatest upsets in the history of the sport, Leon "Rocky" Edwards knocked out Kamaru the Nigerian Nightmare Usman with less than 1 minute left on the clock. The devastating KO will forever be remembered as the moment that an underestimated challenger beat all the odds to pull through and win the belt.
Please describe what this feels like.
I can't put into words, Joe. The old doubted me said I couldn't do it. The old said I couldn't do it. Look at me now!
While a seemingly invincible champion met a humbling defeat. And because the fight was so compelling, the UFC almost immediately booked a rematch, set to take place in the O2 Arena in London on the 18th of March, where the now welterweight champion Leon Edwards will defend his title against Kamaru Usman to cement his position as the greatest welterweight fighter in the world. Some fans are almost certain that Edwards will be able to pull off a spectacular victory once again, and if we take a look at the facts, they could very well be right. The UFC has shown us many examples of fighters who have risen to the status of champions, dominating their competition and building an aura of invincibility around themselves, only to have one loss and derail their whole career. Was the KO that Usman suffered at the hands, or should I say legs, of Edwards this kind of loss? If you take a look at Usman's career, he has an almost perfect record, with only one loss to his name other than his second bout with Edwards. That loss came via submission and happened before he even entered the UFC. So until Edwards came into the picture and sent him to the Shadow Realm, Kamaru was undefeated in the promotion, and on a winning streak that was tied with the great Anderson Silva. Many fans and analysts alike are speculating that such a devastating loss could have negatively affected Usman's mentality and confidence. He may return to the octagon fearful and wary, which will give Edwards the chance to dominate him on his home turf. That's another aspect of this fight that gives Leon an advantage. Being held in London, the British champion will have the crowd's full support, while Kamaru, the Nigerian-born American, will be far away from home, and lacking when it comes to fans chanting his name. With his whole nation backing him and with the pressure of winning in front of his nation, Edwards is likely to feel extra motivated to demonstrate a decisive defeat over his rival. But what about the last fight, I hear you say? While Edwards did come out strong, he appeared to quickly lose steam. And it's true that Usman dominated the majority of their bout till the 5th round when Leon landed his kick. But was it just a fluke? Can he really pull it off again? It's important to consider all the factors when you assess what happened at UFC 278. The event was hosted in Salt Lake City, Utah, a city with an altitude of 4,226 feet, which is higher than most major cities in the USA, and anywhere else for that matter. Not to get too sciencey here, but at higher altitudes, there is lower atmospheric pressure, which can make it harder for the body to transfer oxygen to the blood, which is why higher altitudes can make people lethargic. A lot of elite athletes across different sports train at high altitudes, where they acclimatize and their bodies learn to produce more red blood cells. As a result, they gain an advantage when competing at lower altitudes, or at least perform normally at higher elevations. Now Kamaru Usman, he trains in Denver, Colorado, at a high altitude so his body is adapted, but other fighters, including Leon, aren't so lucky. Leon claims that the altitude played a large role in his gassing out the night of the fight. Even Luke Rockhold and Paulo Costa, who fought in the co-main event that night, seem to be affected by the elevated conditions. When it comes to UFC 286, which is being held in London, it's safe to say that Usman and Edwards will be fighting on a more even playing field. And Rocky is certain that his performance this time around will prove all of his doubters wrong.
It's confirmed in my head that what I'm doing is right and the decisions I'm making in training is right, you know, and the team that I'm around is the right team, so.
Now, it's not uncommon for a fighter to win a championship belt and let the newly acquired money and fame get to their head. But it seems that Leon is humble as ever despite his welterweight title, and he seems focused on maintaining and improving his performance to make sure that in the upcoming match, he wins a decisive victory. In a recent interview with GQ magazine, Edwards revealed part of his grueling training regimen, which includes training twice a day in different disciplines like wrestling, kickboxing, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He seems to be as focused as ever, saying, "You've got to go out there and get it done."
I got into mixed martial arts at the age of 17. My mom suggested me going to the gym because I was getting in trouble as a kid, and I used mixed martial arts to let my energy out and change my focus just by dedicating myself. That's how I become a world champion.
The odds that I couldn't do it, look at me now!
His mentality going into this fight is different than it was the last time as well. Edwards has now proven to himself and the world that Usman is beatable. And considering the devastating KO that he managed to pull off, he's got reason to be confident. With regards to his mentality going into their next bout, Leon said, "I want to bring the confidence from me knocking him out into this fight. The knowledge that he's human like anybody else and can be beaten. I've proven that." But Edwards isn't the only one who's giving weight to his previous encounter with Usman, as many fellow UFC fighters and commentators believe that Edwards has an advantage going into UFC 286. Khamzat Chimaev, the third-ranked welterweight in the UFC, has insinuated that he doesn't believe Usman can bounce back from the devastating KO he suffered at the hands of Edwards, saying in reference to Kamaru, "I don't think he'll ever be the same guy again." UFC commentator and former middleweight champion Michael Bisping has voiced similar concerns, saying that this will be the first time Usman has to enter a fight coming off a brutal loss, and mentioning that it will be interesting to see how he deals with being the bad guy. Former double champion and UFC commentator Daniel Cormier has also chimed in, noting that Kamaru's loss of his invincibility factor and raising the question, will Usman be able to bounce back from such a disastrous loss? Fellow welterweight contender Bilal Muhammad drew attention to this very issue, saying, "You just never know how someone's going to come back from a knockout. You don't know how your brain's going to react. You don't know how your body's going to react. You don't know if it's going to make you hesitate in there." UFC commentator and podcast host Joe Rogan gave his thoughts on Edwards' victory at UFC 278, affirming that it wasn't a fluke, saying, "He shows him the left and hits him with a perfect high kick. You can't take anything away from that. That's the most consequential high kick of all time." Despite the mounting case that Edwards is likely to be able to repeat his last victory, the current betting odds still seem to favor Usman, probably based on the fact that he dominated the majority of the last fight. But if you take into account all the factors we've just discussed, the humbling of Usman, the elevation at UFC 278, the location of UFC 286, Edwards' boosted confidence and brutal training, you might find that the bookies are just giving us an easy way to make some money by placing our bets on Leon "Rocky" Edwards. So there you have it, folks. From a former champion's shattered confidence to odds that drastically underestimate him. That's how Leon Edwards is going to destroy Kamaru Usman at UFC 286.